Hey everyone, welcome back. I wanted to take a little bit of time today to talk to you about one of my favorite JavaScript array methods, which is reducer. Even if you are a beginner or intermediate JavaScript coder, you've seen how frequently we deal with two types of data structures, arrays and objects. And it can be very helpful to be able to change, particularly an array into an object, and reducer is a great way of doing that. Before I show you that, I want to show you how you could kind of go about doing this yourself. You can see over here that I've got a short array of cities, 3 different cities with IDs, names, and populations. And I'm going to write a function called array to object, all right? And this is going to take one argument, which is going to be an array. And what we're going to do here is we're first going to instantiate the thing that we're going to return from this object, which is to say we're going to instantiate an object that I'm going to just call O, and it's going to be an empty object. Now down here, we're going to return O, but not before we do the important second step, which is to do the logic that we need to do to make sure that this object is what we want it to be. So I'm going to use the most basic loop in JavaScript, which is a for loop. And we're going to loop through this array. You've probably seen this before, but I'll just instantiate a variable called I starting at 0. I is going to run as long as it's less than the length of the array. And then, of course, at the end of each loop, I is going to increment by 1. Now, the first thing I'm going to write here is key. And this is like a good first step in almost any for loop, which is that I'm going to write a const that's going to be the current element, which in this case is a city. But remember, our function array to object doesn't know that we're using the cities array. So I'm going to use the more general term element equals the array indexed at the at whatever I is at that time. So that's going to give us a handle of a reference to what the current element is. So wherever we're at in the array, in this case with the cities, it's either going to refer to the New York City object, the Los Angeles object, or the Chicago object. Now here, I want to take this array and turn it into an object. So we need to have keys on our object. So luckily, we have this ID on each of our cities objects. So I'm just going to take this object O and index it at whatever the ID of the current element's ID is. So current element dot ID, and the value of that property on O is just going to be the entire current element. All right. And let's see what that looks like. Down here, I'll write const cities object equals, and now we'll call the function with the parameter, of course, being our cities array. And let's just console log cities object and go over here into our terminal, and I will just run this file and see what gets console logged. Oops, I did not save it. That's a problem. Here we go. And you can see here that this array has been turned into an object with all of the same information. But now the ID properties on each city object are now the keys in the object itself. So we could do that every single time that we wanted to change an array into an object. But that is to say, write our own function to do it. But as is the case in so many cases, for these pieces of functionality that come up over and over, JavaScript has actually given us a very robust way of dealing with that, and that is the reducer function. So let's get rid of all of this. I still want to have a cities object. But instead of writing my own function, I'm going to use JavaScript's reducer function, which reduces an array to a different data structure of your choosing. So here we're going to use the name of the array, which is cities, and then call the reduce method on it. Now this takes a callback function that has a number of of parameters in it. The two most important are the first two, which are going to be the accumulator, which I'll show you what that is in a second, and current value. All right, and we'll just finish that function like that. And let's talk about current value. That automatically does that step that I just showed you, that important step where we took the name of the array and indexed it at the value of I, and it gave us I think I called it current element. Let's actually, just to be consistent, to show that these are the same things, let's call that current element, all right? So one benefit of reduce is that you don't need to do that intermediate step. Now the accumulator is sort of where you're keeping track of all of the information that you're reducing. In the previous example, that was represented by the variable when I said let O equal empty object, and then we returned that object that now was not empty. That's the accumulator is kind of taking the place for that. And the way you initialize the value of the accumulator is down here. And just as I wrote let O equals empty object, here I'm going to put an empty object, meaning that the initial value of the accumulator is an empty object. Now we have to sort of do our logic in here. And this is going to be pretty similar to what we saw before in our for loop. We're going to take this accumulator and we're going to index it at the current element's ID and set its value equal to the current element. At the end of our reducer callback function, we do have to return the accumulator. But let's go down here and console log our cities object and see what this looks like over here in our terminal. If we've done this correctly, we should get the same exact result. Let's see. All right, there you go. You can see here that the reduce function, the reduce method, has done what our function did in just less lines of code and just a more aesthetically pleasing way, frankly. Okay, now let's say that we wanted to do something different. Instead of turning this array into an object, let's say that we just wanted to sum the populations of these cities. Again, I could write a function called sum population, let's say, that took an array. And again, I'm going to do kind of the same pattern that I had before, which is to say let sum equals 0. We instantiate that at the beginning. We're eventually going to return that sum. And in between, we do a for loop. So let I equals 0, I less than array dot length I plus plus. In here, I'll have the same first line, which is const current element equals array indexed at I, and we'll just say sum equals sum plus current element dot population. All right, let's see if that works. Down here, we'll say const total population equals call that function sum population, and the array is of course going to be our cities array, and let's console log that total population, and let's see what that does over here. You can see it's printing out 15.3, which is correct. Again, it's a little clunky, and you wouldn't want to write these new sort of custom helper functions yourself every single time you came about something like this. So instead, I'll get rid of all of this. Just remember this number 15.3, which we have over here. The reducer function is helpful in reducing an array not only to an object, but actually to any data structure that you want. You can define the accumulator however you like. In this case, I'm going to get rid of this line here, because that's not what we're trying to do anymore. We're trying to sum the population here. So we don't want to keep track of that in an object. We want to keep track of it in a number. And specifically, we want to start at 0. Remember earlier when I said let sum equal 0? Here, we're going to initialize the accumulator to be 0. And we're going to have a very similar line here, which is just going to be accumulator equals accumulator plus current element dot population. And watch how easy this is. Console log. Oh, we won't call the constant cities object anymore because that's not what we're doing, but we'll call it total population, and we will console log that. Let's go over here and run this code, and you can see it gives us 15.3. So there's almost no end to the different applications of reduce. Anytime you're using a custom function and a for loop to try to transform your array into some different kind of data structure, consider using reduce. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.